Lovely. Right. Well, good evening. Hello, everybody. Where are we? We're on Wednesday evening, aren't we? Welcome back. Now, I've just been told some of the sign-up numbers for this evening's session, and I think we might have some newcomers. So, if so, welcome. It's lovely to meet you. My name's Sarah Barr-Young, and I'm one of the lawyers here at Stowe Family Law. You know what you're here for. We're delighted to welcome Dr Supriya McKenna. She's joining us for the second time, which is really lovely. I really enjoyed the first Stowe Talk session I did with Supriya, so I'm excited that she's back. She's also back for good because we've got some more exciting news about something else we've been doing, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Now, for those of you who don't know Supriya, she is a highly experienced narcissism expert. Now, there aren't many of them around, and there aren't many of them with Supriya's qualifications and huge wealth of knowledge. Now, she works specifically with victims of narcissistic relationships, and that includes what we mostly talk about, which is within the area of separation and divorce. Now, a little bit of background for you. Supriya qualified as a medical doctor back in 1994, and she went on to train and be a GP. She took a bit of a break in 2017 to look after her children, and she's built upon her experience and the training she's had with more training in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and personal performance coaching with the Coaching Academy. Some of you might have heard of the Coaching Academy. Now, today, she focuses on educating the general public, but also family lawyers, on narcissism. And she gives both practical support and mentoring to the victims of narcissistic relationships. She coaches lawyers. She helps victims to come to terms with what's happened, to understand what's happened to them, but importantly, how to move forwards with their lives. Okay. Many of you may know Supriya as the Life Doctor, and I'm sure my colleague Kate will be putting in the website address into the information that we are going to be providing to you anyway. Alongside the website, there are more resources, which I'm pleased about. I've mentioned before, I'll mention them again. Supriya is the author of two very successful books. The first one, Divorcing a Narcissist, The Lure, the Loss and the Law. And the second one, Narcissism and Family Law, a practitioner's guide. So any family lawyers listening, please make a note of that one. Now, Supriya also co-hosts a podcast called, well, it follows the title of one of the books, Narcissists and Divorce, The Lure, the Loss and the Law. Try saying that, I should ask the wine, maybe not. Supriya was also one of our first guests on a new project that we're doing, which is a podcast, but also a video series, and we're launching that in May. Now, I don't have the launch date to hand right now, but I'm pretty sure Kate's going to be putting it in the notes in due course. Now, one of the reasons I was really looking forward to this evening and talking to Supriya again is because within family law, we need experts like Supriya. We are, well, I'm biased. I think lawyers are excellent. I think family lawyers are excellent. But our role is the law. And frequently we can't provide the kind of support that Supriya can, or the kind of support that a specialist counsellor can, because we're not qualified to do that. And it's frequently outside our remit. So signposting is a very important part of our job. And over the years, we've met a lot of experts and we've gathered a lot of knowledge, and it's only really fair that we share that knowledge, hence the webinar series. Now, the usual format, well, tonight will be the usual format. Supriya is going to do a presentation. We're going to have questions at the end. Just a couple of housekeeping points, I think, to start with, if that's okay. Questions, we love questions. We like being guided by you guys as to what you'd like to talk about, what you'd like to hear about from us. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. There's also the chat function on this webinar. Please feel free to put comments. That's great. We'd love to hear from you. It is a safe space, so please be respectful to each other. I know you will be. The webinars are, as I say, a safe space for people going through divorce or separation. we're here for people to access support, it can be a really lonely thing. So I hope if you are having a difficult time, you're feeling somewhat reassured by the amount of people who are coming to our session tonight and the content, obviously, what we're going to talk about. We're not here just for people going through separation to divorce. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that they are welcome. If you're supporting somebody that's going through nasty separation, you're in the right place. If you're a law student, you're in the right place. It really is lovely to have a nice, big, healthy audience tonight, which is great. Okay, so without further ado, I think I'll hand over to you, Supriya, please, for your presentation.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to sort of dive in here because I've got a million things to say, because it's so important, this topic, and it really is quite in depth. So let's get started. So firstly, I just want to say that, you know, we use the word narcissism today as a buzzword. So we use it to mean anyone at all who's vain, who's selfish, who takes lots of selfies and posts them on Instagram. You know, anyone who drives a sports car or wears you know, designer shoes and handbags, all of that stuff, you know, they're a narcissist. That's what we say. And unfortunately, using the word narcissist in that way really undermines the seriousness of what real narcissism is. And I want to talk about real narcissism, true narcissism today. And it really matters to know when you're dealing with a narcissist, because real narcissists behave in very specific ways in divorce and separation and afterwards as well. And you need to be prepared for this type of behavior and be one step ahead of it. And I want to say from the outset, a real narcissist is going to want to annihilate their spouse in divorce. And they're going to want to annihilate them emotionally, financially, spiritually, you know, in every possible way, even if it's to their own detriment. So that's what we're talking about here. This really is very serious indeed. So I'm going to start by explaining what a true narcissist is. And then I'm going to give you some pointers, which hopefully will help you to become a bit clearer about whether you're actually dealing with a real narcissist or not. And then we'll look at some of the behaviours that you can expect to encounter in divorce. That's the really depressing bit, I'm afraid, if your partner is actually a narcissist. And finally, I'll give you some key tips to help you through the divorce process, which is specific to narcissistic divorces. So a real narcissist is someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. And actually around 1 in 20 people have it. And it's a real, diagnosable, specific personality disorder. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a narcissist. So NPD is a condition characterized by low empathy, a sense of entitlement, and an addiction to trying to feel special. And all of this comes at the expense of other people. So let's go back to that. Low empathy, a sense of entitlement, and an addiction to trying to feel special. And actually, NPD forms in the early years of a person's life, and it forms as a result of the way in which a child's brain becomes abnormally wired. So this is what's happening, this abnormal wiring. And the abnormal wiring occurs in response to an upbringing which was difficult in some way. So, you know, the narcissist has had a difficult childhood pretty much always. And that's something to really be aware of. And unfortunately, this abnormal wiring is what leads to the abusive behaviors towards other people in adulthood. And that I'm talking about narcissistic abuse here. Well, narcissistic abuse is actually mostly covert emotional abuse. There can be physical abuse associated with it, but there's always a psychological component. And that's really important to understand. And it's often really quite subtle in the relationship itself. It can be difficult to spot because of that. But in divorce, a narcissist will ramp up the abuse and really to almost intolerable levels. So if you didn't spot it during the relationship, you probably will during the divorce. Now, it's really important to realize that narcissism is actually a condition of low self-esteem. So although the person may look on the outside as if they have a rather inflated sense of self-regard, not always, but some of them, most of them do, on the inside, they all feel utterly worthless. So every single thing they do is geared towards not having to face how they really feel about themselves. So what they do, and this is crucial to understanding narcissism, what they do is they create a false, often grandiose image, but not always grandiose, but they create an image which they present to the outside world. And then they need external validation to prop up this image, this false persona, as it's known. And this is really key to understanding the condition, because everything they do, everything is to get this external validation, including abusive behaviours towards other people. So in other words, they create this false image of themselves for other people to believe in, so that they can believe in it themselves, so that they can deny their own intrinsically low self-esteem. So that's what it's all about. Now, I have to say, unfortunately, in the UK, psychologists and therapists and doctors actually don't get trained in narcissistic personality disorder as a standard part of the training. So I'm afraid it's difficult to get a narcissist diagnosed in this country. It's possible, but the vast majority of narcissists will never be diagnosed. And it's also really important to understand that there's actually very little you can do about NPD. It's not really curable. And narcissists, of course, they don't seek help for it because it suits them to be narcissistic, because it allows them to exploit other people for their own benefit. So to them, it's a good thing. So you can kind of see why, if you can't cure it and the narcissist isn't going to present for any kind of therapy, you can kind of see why people aren't trained in it, professionals aren't trained in it in this country. So how do you actually recognize a true narcissist? You know, what do narcissists actually look like in real life? Well, narcissists tend to fall into 4 categories with regards to the way that they actually appear on the outside. So that false persona that I mentioned. So remember that on the inside, they've all got that low self-esteem, and they're clinging to a need to feel special as a result of that low self-esteem. But on the outside, there are 4 major ways in which they can present. And again, remember that behind closed doors with their nearest and dearest, they all tend to behave in very similar ways. We're talking here about how they predominantly outwardly present to the outside world who don't know them very well. So let's start with the type that most people are familiar with, and that's the exhibitionist narcissist, also known as the grandiose narcissist. So they are grandiose in the way that they behave. They look like they believe themselves to be superior. They're very convincing at appearing superior. They have superficial charm. They're larger than life. They're full of charisma. They're often extroverts. Very often they're high achievers as well. And they'll tell you how good they are at things. So Donald Trump is just a brilliant example here. He would say things like, nobody knows about technology better than me, and I understand things better than, better than almost anybody. That's the kind of grandiose statement that an exhibitionist narcissist will make, very much in keeping with that type. And the second type is the devaluing narcissist. And actually Donald Trump very handily falls into this category as well. So this person, this type of person, inflates their own ego, so their own sense of self, by putting other people down, by devaluing others. So they demean them, and they call them names, they criticize them, they deny or minimize their achievements, or they make up sort of false stories about them so that other people think badly of them. And they do this in order to make themselves feel good about themselves in comparison. So they're always comparing themselves to other people, and they come across as really pretty openly toxic. I think they're the most easy type to spot, actually, because if you know that they could be narcissistic rather than just toxic, it's pretty obvious. The third type of narcissist is the closet narcissist. And they are the hardest type to spot by far and away. If you don't know them at all well, they actually come across as nice people. They can be shy and quiet and self-effacing, and they can appear quite sort of kind. And, they don't, the point about these people and why it's difficult to spot them is that they actually shy away from the limelight. That's how they differ from the other types of narcissists. But they still need to get that sense of specialness. So what they often do is they associate with people who they regard as special. So perhaps they associate with people who are in the limelight, and they do that so that they can actually bask in their reflected glory. So it's quite a covert way of feeling special about themselves by associating with people who they think are special. And another defining characteristic of this type is the tendency to play the victim. They might have mystery illnesses, for example, to get attention. They very often will use the children and say that the children have got illnesses that they haven't really got. Sort of Munchausen syndrome by proxy is how it used to be known. They'll do anything they can to covertly get attention and that external validation that I was talking about. And it can take decades to work them out. So think of, if for an example, you know, the village doctor. Imagine the village doctor. Well, maybe his self-effacing wife, who kind of sees herself as the wind beneath his wings, you know, but she always feels terribly put upon, and she's really unappreciated by everybody, and no one comes to see her, and you know, people wanted to babysit the whole time, and poor her with her aches and pains, and you know, that's the type that we're talking about here. And the final type is the communal narcissist, or the altruistic narcissist. And they actually derive their sense of specialness and get their external validation from doing what look like altruistic deeds. So they need to be seen to be the most charitable person, or the most caring person, or the most generous person, but they're not true altruists. You know, their motives are not pure, and actually they're backstabbers behind the scenes. And you will find them, you know, in the classic places, religious groups, charities, on committees, and they'll come across as being very much, you know, the do-gooders. And I mentioned that Donald Trump was in 2 groups. Well, the reason for that is that some narcissists actually move between the groups depending on their circumstances. So remember that the purpose of these outward personas, these false personas, is to get that external validation. I'm going to go on and on about this. You'll really have this by the end of this talk, but it's all about that external validation so that they can feel special and not have to feel their true feelings about themselves, of that shame and that inadequacy. So some narcissists will use different outward personas at different times in their lives, depending on what's going to work best for them at that time in actually securing that external validation. So they do morph between the types, or many of them morph between the types. Now, external validation is what we've been talking about, but actually that's got a name when it comes to narcissism, and it's called narcissistic supply. And a narcissist gets narcissistic supply not just from attention and adoration, which you've probably experienced, but through the divorce process, you'll have experienced these next 3, because they also get narcissistic supply from drama, conflict, and by instilling fear into other people. And of course, that's very, very relevant in divorce. So what are some giveaway behaviours? Well, all narcissists behind closed doors behave in similarly abusive ways towards others. But I just want to talk about some of the things that you might have noticed if you are, in fact, dealing with a narcissist. And these are common to all narcissists. So all narcissists lack empathy. That is fundamental to narcissism, because narcissists don't reach the developmental stage of actually learning empathy. So they can't put themselves in other people's shoes and actually feel their pain. So with life experience, they can pretend to have empathy, they can feign empathy, and that's known as cognitive empathy, but they can't actually feel true emotional empathy. And that means that they can't actually care about other people. They can't care about others because they can't experience what other people must be feeling. And that's why they behave so badly, or that's one of the reasons why they behave so very badly in divorce. They can't feel your pain, and so they don't care about it. And so very often the partners of narcissists say that if they've been ill, their partner hasn't looked after them. The narcissist is rubbish at looking after people who are ill. But if someone they don't know very well is ill, the narcissist might make a really big show of looking after them, because it's all about impression management and trying to look good to others. So that's a bit of a giveaway there. So were you love bombed at the beginning of your relationship? You know, did you think that you'd met your soulmate? Did they present themselves as being the perfect person for you? You know, did they shower you with gifts or spend every waking moment with you? Or were they incredibly helpful towards you? Did your relationship progress at a really fast pace, much faster than normal? Did they seem to share your values and your dreams? And did they love all the same things as you? Did they put you on a pedestal and tell you that you are incredible? I mean, that's kind of what you hope for in a relationship, isn't it? But if it's all just a bit too much, then that is love bombing. And, you know, all narcissistic relationships pretty much start with this over the top love bombing. So that's a bit of a giveaway as well. But it's really important to understand what happens next, because you then enter a cycle. So after that initial love bombing, once they've reeled you in, you enter what's known as the devaluation stage. So here, very subtly, they start to devalue you. So they might give you just the odd critical comment here and there. Maybe they'll disguise it as a joke. And then little by little, they'll increase the devaluations in volume. So what they're going to do is they're going to look at your vulnerabilities and they're going to use them against you. So say if you're touchy about your weight, they might say, oh, you know, are you sure you should be having that cake? You know, I think you look fine, but, you know, I know you're a bit concerned about your weight. So, you know, maybe you should give it a miss, or maybe you should, you know, put something a bit more floaty on, because, you know, that's sort of showing, you know, some of you're looking a bit dodgy. You can see your fat arms through that. You know, I want you to feel comfortable. So, you know, that's why I'm telling you this. I think you look great, but, you know, and so they'll start to, you know, that kind of thing. So it's quite subtle, but your heart sinks and you think, right, I'm going to start going to the gym, or I'm going to change the way I dress, or, you know, I'm going to stop jumping through hoops to please the narcissist. And then the narcissist suddenly pulls out the love bombing again. And you think, oh, phew, everything's amazing, everything's perfect, and it's all good. But the devaluation is going to come back, basically. This is a cycle. These are cycles of what's known as idealization, the love bombing, and then devaluation, and they repeat over and over and over again all the way through the relationship. And the devaluations get bigger and bigger over time. Name calling, insults, put downs. They might even, you know, it might be physical abuse even. But, you know, you don't notice if you're a victim, because the heat kind of gets turned up really, really slowly on these behaviors. And also, these behaviors are interspersed with love bombing as well. So it's not just that it gets worse and worse and worse, because you just leave, wouldn't you? But when they intersperse them with love bombing and everything goes back to being nice again, it's really confusing. So you don't see that it's a pattern. You don't see that it's a cycle. And why this is important is because these cycles actually cause changes in the brain chemicals of the victim. And that is what is known as trauma bonding. You might have heard of that. So the victim actually becomes neurochemically addicted to the narcissist. I mean that. I mean addicted to the narcissist. So if you can relate to a feeling of actually being addicted to your partner, and most people tell me that they can, when I'm dealing with the partners of narcissists, you know, perhaps feeling like you literally couldn't live without them, that might be a warning sign that you are actually dealing with a narcissist. Now, I want to talk about rage as well, because rage is a classic giveaway of a narcissist. So when the narcissist is low on external validation or narcissistic supply, their false persona, that image that they put out, that is a protective thing for them, it suffers what's known as a narcissistic injury. So if you've left them, or if you've slighted them in some way, or if they don't get their way, or if they lose at something, they have a narcissistic injury, and they suddenly tip into narcissistic rage, that they see red and it's all consuming. And they want to punish whoever it is that they think caused this injury to them. And of course, this happens in divorce. You know, if you've left the narcissist, then they're going to be, you know, they're going to be really upset about it, because they're narcissistic. You've left them. You're no longer a source of narcissistic supply. Therefore, they don't have enough narcissistic supply to keep their false persona going. Therefore, they feel their feelings of shame and worthlessness, and so they react with rage. And of course, if they react with rage, you're going to be scared of them. They're going to get drama. They're going to get attention. They're going to get conflict, and the levels of narcissistic supply then go up again, which means that they can then sort of have their false persona all strong and whole again, and they feel okay again, because they're then protected from their own feelings. So that's kind of what it's all about with narcissistic rage. Jealousy is another big factor in narcissism. You know, were they jealous of other people's successes, whilst at the same time believing that other people were jealous of them? Another hallmark sign of narcissism. I mentioned playing the victim earlier with the closet narcissist. Well, all narcissists actually play the victim. Closet narcissists do it all the time, but in divorce and separation, all narcissists will play the victim, and they can be very convincing as well. Now, the narcissist's relationship to the truth is really important to talk about as well, because the truth is whatever a narcissist says it is at the time that they are saying it. So they completely believe their own lies, and they're really, really convincing. They don't see truth as a fixed entity. The truth is what they say it is at the time that they're saying it. And of course, again, that's very relevant in divorce, because they'll lie about everything, and they will lie in court, and they will be convincing. And of course, if you think about it, their false persona is a lie. The whole thing is false. So they're very good at lying, because, you know, it comes completely naturally to them. They do it every single day. They do it for every minute of every day. You may have heard of the term gaslighting as well. And if you haven't, please do look this up. But gaslighting, just to be brief, it's a type of lie which is designed to make the person doubt their reality or their memory or their perceptions or even their feelings. So, a narcissist will say, well, that didn't happen. This is what happened. Or, they didn't say that. They said this, or you shouldn't be feeling that way. You should be feeling this way. Your feelings are wrong, that kind of thing. And the reason that they gaslight other people is so that those people doubt themselves, so that they stop trusting themselves and they start trusting the narcissist version of reality instead. And of course, what that means is it means that the victim starts to become reliant on the narcissist. And so it kind of keeps them exactly where the narcissist wants them. The narcissist wants their spouse to be in play as a reliable source of narcissistic supply, who's too weak and too confused to leave them. The narcissist doesn't want you to leave them. That's, that they want you there. You're an appliance. You're like a toaster or a kettle. You are there simply to give them narcissistic supply. That is your job. And that's, I'm afraid, all it is. So narcissists exploit other people as well, as I've already said, and they do this for their own gain. And they're able to do it, as we've said, because they can't really care about how other people are feeling. And they exploit people for all sorts of things. They might have exploited you for your money. They might have tried to get you to do all the cleaning, getting you to act as their own personal slave. At work, they take credit for other people's work as well. There are loads of ways that a narcissist can exploit other people. And you will have been exploited in many ways, some of them subtle, if you were married to a narcissist or in a relationship with a narcissist. I mentioned also sense of entitlement. And, this is a big one for narcissists. And because they've got a sense of entitlement, they violate people's boundaries as well. So that's really important. If you're the type of person that sort of said no to a narcissist and then just given in anyway, because the narcissist has pushed your boundaries, that's, again, that's another key indicator. They are terrible boundary violators. So really look out for that one. Now, in divorce, that kind of sense of entitlement means that they have this belief that they are entitled to everything and you are entitled to nothing. So they're entitled to the house, they're entitled to maintenance for life, they're entitled to the children living with them all the time, and you should never have them. And that's how it feels if you're dealing with a real narcissist in divorce. Now, again, a really important thing to talk about is the fact that the rules and laws do not apply to narcissists, or that's how they feel. So, many people, for example, will notice that narcissists are really bad drivers because the rules of the road, I hear this all the time. It's terrible drivers, the rules of the road don't apply to them. They just don't see why they should drive within the speed limit. They don't see why they should slow down when there's a blind corner in front of them. So that's a bit of a giveaway as well. But not all of them do this, of course, so it can play out in many different ways. But when we're talking about rules and laws, of course, it's important because a real narcissist might not abide by court orders. They're certainly never going to, I don't think I've ever heard of a narcissist filling in their Form E on time. Not one, I don't think. They won't give full financial disclosure. They just won't play by the rules and laws of the court or the court timetable. They just won't do it. And it's very confusing, and solicitors often don't know what to do with that. Love. Now, love is really important to talk about as well. This is a bit of a bummer for all of you listening, but all love is transactional or conditional for a narcissist. And why I think this is important is it's true for you, but it's also true for your children and their children, your children with them. Narcissists do not experience love in the same way as ordinary people. So you probably believed that they loved you, especially in the love bombing phases, but I'm afraid that was just a means to an end. It was a way to control you and to get narcissistic supply from you. And with the children, they might play out, they might seem to be the perfect parent, Disney dad, perfect mom in public. But again, it's all about impression management and it's all about getting narcissistic supply. Children, again, are just accessories in this sense. So following on, that explains how narcissists are able to use their children as weapons of narcissistic abuse. If you're dealing with a narcissist, they will use the children as weapons against you. And they'll do that post-divorce as well, for as long as they possibly can. So, a narcissist is going to use the children as pawns to punish you. They might try to get the children to live with them, even if it's not in anyone's interest. They might stop paying school fees or for extracurricular activities. They'll badmouth you to the children. They'll do whatever they can to punish you in some way, emotionally or financially. And at this point, I want to say, I'm not judging narcissists in any way here, because it sounds a bit like I'm going, sort of, I'm not judging them, because they are the way that they are as a result of the way that they reacted to difficult upbringings. They're wired to behave like this. It's not really a choice, but that doesn't mean, because many people think, oh, well, that means they're ill and therefore I should stay. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that you should continue to put yourself or your children in positions where you're going to be abused. It might not be their fault, but it doesn't make it acceptable. So, what do narcissists actually do in divorce and separation? Well, this is the really depressing bit. Remember, it's all about narcissistic supply. I'm going to keep saying it because it's the one concept that you need to understand. The divorce process fuels giving the narcissistic supply. It gives them drama and conflict. Narcissists don't want a resolution. They want to use the process of divorce to give them that premium narcissistic supply. And that means that they can punish you for as long as possible. So they actually want to draw the process out. They cause delays. That's why they do that. And they'll stop at nothing, even to their own detriment, to try to punish you. And if you are divorcing a true narcissist, you will have the sense that they are trying to annihilate you. I've mentioned that word before, but that, and again, not a single person that's divorcing a narcissist, that you will understand that it feels like annihilation. That's what it feels like. If you've just got a difficult spouse who is upset, you won't be feeling like they're trying to annihilate you. But if you've got a narcissistic spouse, look at how you feel. Does it feel like annihilation? If it does, you're probably dealing with a narcissist. So financial abuse, of course, is one of the ways that a narcissist can abuse you. And if they're the high earner in the partnership, and they'll do all sorts of things. They'll reduce their own income and assets to punish you. They'll try to reduce what's left to divide up in the marital pot, in the financial pot. So they might spend loads of money during the divorce, or give money away, or buy gifts for other people that are really expensive, or plunge money into unsuccessful business ventures, sell assets for, next to nothing, or give them away again. If they're in self-employed, which many of them are, they might not take drawings out of their own business. So it looks like they're earning very little. They might not accept bonuses. Again, I've heard of narcissists say, no, thank you, but I won't take that £120,000 this year. You can keep that. I've actually heard of narcissists do that. They'll deliberately reduce their income. Again, if they're self-employed, they can do that, can't they? That's easy. So they'll reduce their earnings over the divorce process. And then, hey, presto, as soon as the divorce is finalized, they're suddenly on lots of money again. They might say, oh, well, I'm going to retire because I'm really stressed. So, I won't be earning for very much longer. And that's another classic example. They might even overpay tax, and look out for this one. They might overpay tax in the year of the divorce, so that they get a rebate basically after the financial settlement. So it's taking money out of the financial pot, basically. It's a very clever way of doing it. Again, they can say, oh, I'm ill, I can't work because I've got this back problem, or I've got X, Y, and Z, I've got depression, I can't work my previous hours, so, I'm afraid, you're not going to get much from me. They might try to sell the house at way below the market value. That's very common as well, extremely stressful. They might nick money from joint accounts, literally just withdraw money and hide it, spend it. You might think you're safe if you're in a joint account, but you're not. So please be careful there. They might refuse to pay interim maintenance to the children and to you through the divorce process. I say might, it's almost the norm, that they'll try not to pay interim maintenance. And they'll do things like maybe not pay the school fees, as I've said before, or mortgage payments or bills, especially if you then have to pay for them. And, if you've got limited savings, that's a great way to control you financially. I've also already mentioned the children. The children are just brilliant tools of financial abuse as well. Even by just stopping paying for, Johnny's football lessons that he loves, you then feel you've got to pay because you don't want Johnny to miss out. No empathy there again from the narcissist. You get a slightly different pattern if the narcissist is the lower earner. I mean, obviously there are overlaps, but, they have a massive sense of entitlement as well. So to them, what's theirs is theirs, and what's yours is very definitely also theirs, so they're going to make really unreasonable financial demands. I want the house mortgage free. I don't want to pay a bill in my life. You know, they'll talk to the children and say, oh, it's, you know, we're having a terrible time with the money, and, you know, mummy or daddy won't give us any money. So you'll have to leave your school and we'll have to move somewhere else, and you won't see your friends again because mummy or daddy's taking all the money and we're going to be poor. And of course, that's going to emotionally sort of manipulate you into sort of giving more financially, because of the effect that the lies are having on the children's relationship with you. So, you know, again, it's all very manipulative. And again, I can't work because I'm ill, running up joint credit card debts and then making you pay if they're not the higher earner. Blackmail, massive one. I'm going to tell everyone that your sister took, you know, cocaine if you don't give me the house. They might refuse to sell the family home. That's very common. Or they are really obstructive with house viewing, so it doesn't sell for ages. It's just really difficult. To make matters worse, they're gonna ramp up the emotional abuse as well. So how are they going to do that? I mean, remember that they need to be in control, and they want to mentally destabilize you, because this is a really good way to wield power and create drama, and of course give them that all important narcissistic supply, you know. So this is what it's all about again. So the emotional abuse is a fantastic way of getting that attention from you, the drama and the conflict, and scaring you, and it's just a brilliant way to get supply. So they might stalk you. They might bug your house, or threaten to bug your house or your car or your computer. And I would urge you to listen to our podcast on cyber stalking. We've got a couple of podcasts on cyber stalking because it's much more common than you might think. And it was a real eye-opener for me doing that podcast. You know, they might hack into your emails or your mobile phone. Also, you know, tech abuse is a really big factor, but the Refuge website have some quite good articles, etc., about tech abuse. So do have a look at that if you think that might be happening to you. They might intercept your post or have it redirected to themselves. That happens all the time as well. It's surprisingly easy to do. The post office do nothing about it, even though it's illegal. They might enlist other people to spread rumors about you on their behalf. They might take all the financial paperwork from the house, so you've no access to your own paperwork, so you don't know what's yours and what isn't yours. Very, very commonly, they'll take the family photos, especially if they're online. That's a tragic. I see that all the time, all the time. They'll change the passwords so you have no access, for example, or they'll just take them. They very often will refuse to move out of the family home, of course, whilst continuing to be abusive, because they can really, you know, get narcissistic supply from you if you're there in front of them. They may even have, you know, extramarital relationships whilst you're separating, just to destabilize you, and they'll be flaunting this person in front of you. Threatening to move the children away from the jurisdiction of the court or abroad is another classic. And of course, blackmail, as I've said, blackmail with you or your friends or your family. If you don't accept their settlement terms, they're going to blackmail you. Revenge porn, that's another big one, I'm afraid. Another big one is calling the police and inventing claims of abuse or assault. So they're going to say, you know, she hit me, or he, you know, he's an abuser. And that happens all the time. And it's not uncommon for the victim to spend a night in the cells. In fact, it's very common indeed. Threatening to destroy property, burn down the house, threatening to ruin you financially, threatening to badmouth you to your employer, or report you to your professional body if you don't agree to their settlement terms. All of these are really common. Even threatening to put the pets down or to take them away. The smear campaign, of course, is another big one, telling lies about you to your friends, your family, your work colleague, saying that you've had affairs, you're a drug abuser, you're an alcoholic, you're violent, you've got mental health issues. All of this will be, you know, they'll be saying terrible things about you. So this is all they're just classic narcissistic tactics, I'm afraid. And now legal abuse, which is the sort of the third strand really of the narcissist abuse tactics in divorce. They're going to use the legal system as a tool of abuse against you. So they might allege child abuse, as I've said, or allege that you're alienating them from the children. And they'll take you to court and engage you in unnecessary court proceedings. Every time you think you're reaching an agreement, they'll change the goalposts, and that can run up your legal bills and it can wear you down. And they will use your own legal team against you. So, they might bombard you with lots and lots of correspondence, and then you feel you've got to answer, no, I'm not a prostitute. No, I'm not a drug addict. You might be sending letters back through your solicitor to these terrible, accusations. Of course, it all costs money. And they're also going to be using their own solicitor at the same time as a tool of abuse. So they'll literally be getting their solicitor to copy and paste their own abusive letters onto their solicitor's letterheaded notepaper. You must have seen this, and you can always tell because there's a bit of sense and then there's rubbish and there's a tiny bit of sense and it's slightly apologetic, and just you can get the undertone of embarrassment. But unfortunately, lawyers have to take instructions from their clients, or they feel they have to take instructions from their clients. So many actually just go along with this. I really urge them to really question this because it is actually unprofessional and it is actually unethical, and they're not helping the situation. So, it's not the best thing, but lots and lots of lawyers do just go along with it. They get worn down, unfortunately, by the narcissist. Now, again, narcissists don't want that quick resolution of matters that you want. They want to drag things out, and the longer they can do this for, the more narcissistic supply they're going to get, and the more legal fees they're going to get you to spend as well. So those delays are going to be caused in lots of different ways. I mean, mediation is the number one way to cause delays in a narcissistic divorce. They've got no intention of resolving matters. They use mediation as a way to draw out the whole process. And the thing about mediation, normal mediation, classic mediation, you, the narcissist, and the mediator, is that, you can nearly reach agreements, or you can reach agreements, and then 2 days later, the narcissist can go, no, I've changed my mind. Actually, I do want the whole house. It's just a way of causing drama and chaos and havoc, and, spinning the wheel of, acting the victim and making you the perpetrator and drawing in the mediator. Terrible idea. Don't do normal mediation. We'll talk about mediation in a minute in a little bit more detail, because there is a type of mediation that does work with narcissists. And I would urge you to try this type of mediation. It's called hybrid mediation. I'll talk about that in a minute. But, narcissists aren't going to conform to any rules. So they're going to make a mockery of the legal system because they're not going to play by its rules. So as I've said before, financial disclosure, they're not going to give that. They're not going to abide by deadlines. They possibly won't abide by court orders. It's confusing, it's distressing, and they're getting the narcissistic supply. They can lie in court at the final hearing, even under oath, and they'll get away with it. You can't appeal if the judge hasn't made an error at law. You can only appeal if they've made an error at law, not because they were taken in by a narcissist. That's not grounds for an appeal. A charming, plausible narcissist can easily fool the judge. Well, you can't appeal that. And also, even if the narcissist lies in court, which they will, the family court won't provide any retribution. So, the court will do nothing about it if they lie, even if they openly lie. So, there's no punishment there. So what can you do if you're separating from a narcissist? So here are just a few tips. Firstly, number one, try to find a lawyer who really understands narcissism fully. At the moment, only about 20% do. And they're usually the experienced ones, the more senior ones, and look for a higher level of training as well. They might be an arbitrator as well, or they might do hybrid mediation or different types of collaborative practice. They might do different types of law on top of just being a solicitor, so that they do other things as well. They've had higher levels of training, because they will know a lot more about these difficult personality types, and they'll have more experience. So, but preferably you want one who really understands narcissistic personality disorder specifically. Because you need a solicitor who isn't going to respond to every tiny little accusation that the narcissist sends you via their solicitor. You want them to be aware of how they've got to be able to step back and not feed the drama and the conflict. They've got to not give the narcissistic supply. It's really important that they understand that. Now, cut off all contact if you can. Again, that means you're cutting off their supply of fuel, of narcissistic supply. They have to then go somewhere else to find it. They have to find a new victim if you cut off their fuel lines, because they need that narcissistic supply. It's not optional. They need it. Of course, that's all well and good, isn't it, for me to say, oh, cut off all contact. How are you going to do that if you share children with a narcissist, or if you work with them? I mean, it's really hard. So I would then say, you know, really limit the amount of narcissistic supply you give them. So limit communication to email only, or so just one method of communication, or even better than email, Our Family Wizard. That's a parenting app, which is really good with narcissists. They hate it. It keeps them accountable. It's all court admissible. They hate it. So it's a really good one, but they have to agree to it, although it can be court ordered, actually. So, you know, if you are going to court, it can be court ordered that the narcissist actually communicates exclusively via Our Family Wizard. But as I say, just one method. If you can't do Our Family Wizard, do email only, so that you're not tempted to respond to every message really quickly, and block them from every other method of contact. Because again, reducing that narcissistic supply. So you only respond to what you absolutely have to. So don't respond to character assassinations. Never justify yourself. Don't express any emotions at all at what they've said. You know, don't seem surprised, or I am disappointed by your letter. I am outraged at what you've said. You know, nothing, no emotions. Cut out the emotions, because every single little thing will give them narcissistic supply. And again, you know, I'd urge you to get on the internet and look up the grey rock technique. That's another thing. In addition to gaslighting, the grey rock technique, brilliant for reducing the amount of narcissistic supply that you give a narcissist. So I'd urge you to look that up, the grey rock technique. Really important for you to understand, the family court does not deliver justice, I'm afraid. And I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? That's exactly what you thought it was going to deliver. It doesn't deliver justice, and it doesn't deliver retribution for bad behavior. You know, a narcissist can behave really badly all the way through, and they will not be punished for it, and it will not affect the outcome. You know, the money will be split in the way that the money is going to split regardless of how badly they behave. The children, you know, it's not about, you know, how badly they've behaved, how the child arrangements aren't going to be, it's not going to be relevant apart from if there's actual abuse towards the children. So, you know, be aware that the court won't save you. The court isn't your sort of place to go to be saved. That's not what it's about at all, I'm afraid. So again, you know, if you can avoid going to court, I would urge you to try. You know, the court system's on its knees. There are massive delays. There's a shortage of judges. You might end up with lay magistrates making the decisions who, you know, frankly, may not have a clue about narcissistic personality disorder. They won't. They might not have the experience. They won't recognize an abusive relationship. They won't recognize that, you know, it's really difficult. They have legal advisors, but they don't necessarily understand what the depth you know, of complex things like personality disorders. So it's a really scary place to be, the court. It's a bit of a lottery. You know, even if you do get a judge, they might not have had the time to read your notes, for example. You know, narcissists are plausible, they're charming, you know this, so judges may well believe their lies. So what can you do to avoid going to court? Well, there are two things. Hybrid mediation, I mentioned before. This is a type of mediation which basically works with about 80% of narcissists. They have to agree to hybrid mediation though. And the difference between hybrid mediation and normal mediation is there's a special type of mediator who's at a high level of training, a hybrid mediator. You sit in one room with your lawyer. The narcissist sits in another room with their lawyer, and it can be online, and the hybrid mediator goes between the two. It's not shuttle mediation, that's different. Although there is a shuttling component, it's a different type of mediation, because you can tell, basically the hybrid mediator can hold confidences. So you can tell the hybrid mediator, I think my spouse is a narcissist. And they will be able to keep that confidential. A normal mediator will then have to go in and say, I'm afraid they think you're a narcissist. You know, they can't keep confidences. And also you can say, look, I'm prepared to give him, you know, 50% of the house, say, if he does X, Y, or Z. You can tell them your bottom line, and the mediator doesn't have to then go and tell the other person your bottom line. They can negotiate, knowing, holding it in the back of their minds. So it's a really elegant solution, really, to dealing with a narcissist. So that's the thing to go for. It seems expensive as an upfront cost, but actually it's much, 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 much cheaper than going all the way through to a final hearing. And it resolves things really quickly, 1 or 2 sessions. So that's something I'd really recommend. The other thing is arbitration. If you don't want to be spending months and months In the court system, arbitration is a private type of adjudication where the judge is essentially a private judge. Again, they'll read your notes. You can choose your arbitrator. You can choose one that understands or has a good chance of understanding narcissism. It's just a much better solution, and it's about a third of the cost of going all the way through the court process. So do look into that as well. I'm just going to have a quick drink of water because I've been talking non-stop. Also protect yourself from financial abuse by telling banks about the separation. So particularly with joint accounts, so that joint funds can only be frozen with 2 signatures, etc. Things can be frozen, withdrawn rather, with 2 signatures, or money can be frozen. Don't mention narcissistic personality disorder in court. We haven't trained enough judges yet for them to understand it, I'm afraid, and it might work against you. And, adjust your expectations of what a reasonable outcome might look like. It's a false economy fighting for 2 years through the court system to get what you think is the best financial outcome, because your mental health is going to suffer. You're going to take a hit probably to get out quicker. And that's what I think you really need to think about that. Don't fight for the best financial outcome. It's probably not worth it mentally. And really, I also want to say, I'm afraid, and again, this is utterly depressing, but you're going to have to prepare yourself for continued issues after the divorce if you have children, or if you're financially tied to the narcissist in some way. So parallel parenting is the way to deal with this. Again, get on Google, look up parallel parenting. It's the only way to deal with a narcissist. It's the only way to parent with a narcissist. You can't co-parent with a narcissist. The narcissist is never going to be rational or reasonable, not even when the dust is settled on the divorce. You're never going to be able to attend parents' evenings nicely, together, as a joint team. There's not going to be compromise. They're going to continue to use the children as tools of abuse against you. So, parallel parenting is the model. Please do look that up, because you just cannot co-parent with a narcissist. A real narcissist counter-parents. They go against every single thing that you want for the child, because again, it's the source of narcissistic supply. So, utterly depressing, really. But what I do want to say, which is really important for you to understand, is that, you've got to get through this. You've got to get through this process. But it is actually worth it to get through this process. You might be thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to get divorced. That's it. I'm going to stay with him or her. And, my life is, set out for the rest of my life. It's going to be terrible. But actually leaving it's worth it. It's worth it. Because, the narcissist actually showed you your wounds, your core wounds. They were attracted to you because of the wounds that you had when you were a child, that were inflicted upon you by your own parents. That's kind of what the narcissist was drawn to. You find the person whose teeth fit your wounds. That's the expression that we use there. So, the narcissist actually helped you identify those wounds, and you can heal them over. So it is possible for you to really heal from this abuse and actually live life in a far fuller way, a life full of joy, full of real love, mutually reciprocated love. So the grass actually is greener, is what I'm trying to say at the end of a narcissistic relationship. So I think that's basically all I have to say.
That's absolutely awesome.
Excuse me with my cough.
As always, I love hearing you speak. And I love your power and passion for your subject, Supriya. It's brilliant. I just want to touch on a couple of things. Ironically, as we moved through, you answered a lot of the questions that have been coming up, which is great. One of the things I just wanted to flag up is Our Family Wizard. I think everybody got that, and I think Kate's put the details possibly in the chat function. But ironically, Our Family Wizard does do an article on parallel parenting and communication on their website. So
very good. Yeah, that
might be an idea for people to have a look at. The idea of trying to co-parent with a narcissist is just, it's such hard work. It's very, very hard. Just because you get a final order doesn't mean that the difficulties stop, as you pointed out. What I'd like to talk about, if this is all right with you, is just reverting to one of the elements that you touched on about childhood experience, how narcissists may become what may develop NPD because of a childhood experience. There's references to suspected narcissists being brought up as the golden child, things like that. What's your view on that?
Oh yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's so there's various ways in which a narcissist can be formed. One very common way is by being brought up by a narcissist. So narcissism is normal for them, it's their normal, and they kind of take it on and become that way. So that's one way, having a narcissistic parent, very common indeed. But you don't necessarily become a narcissist if you have a narcissistic parent. You can actually, not be a narcissist, but you do tend to draw narcissists to you in later life. So many of the people on this webinar will actually think they've got a narcissistic parent and may well have a narcissistic parent, and that might have predisposed them actually to becoming a further victim of narcissistic abuse. But another way to become a narcissist is, as you say, the golden child. So that kind of, it is thought that sort of the self-esteem movement, my special little princess, my wonderful prince, where you sort of you sort of build a child up without them actually having achieved anything and tell them that they're special, and they kind of come to rely on external validation in that way, without actually having any real power. They just think they're marvelous because they've been told they're marvelous, but they need to just continue to be told they're marvelous, and they then become quite entitled. And so it's thought that that's another way to make a narcissist, basically. But then there's lots of other ways, like if you put down a narcissist all the time, if you're a highly critical parent, then the child can internalize that message that they're useless and they're worthless. And then as a defense mechanism, they create this false persona, and they need, in order to protect themselves. So it's kind of, as a parent, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you put them down too much, they can become a narcissist. If you tell them how great they are too much, they can become a narcissist, So there's lots of different ways. Even parents who want to be, they don't really see so think of the helicopter parents, the parents that kind of, they only praise their children for what they've done. So that's another thing, so they want them to be, you have to be the Mary in the nativity play, and then you have to be grade 8 violin by the time you're 7, and you have to get all the leads in all the plays and be top of the class in maths and be on the national hockey team, and go to Oxford, and if you don't do those things, they'll give you praise when you're doing those things, but if you don't, you get nothing, or they're cold and they're demeaning. And those types of parents who kind of live their lives through their children also can make narcissism, basically. So there's lots of different ways.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk about long marriages. There's been a couple of comments about people's surprise in that they might have been married for 20 or 30 years and then found out that their spouse suffers from NPD, or obviously is a controlling narcissist. In your view, how common is that sort of situation?
It is incredibly common. It is incredibly common. My record with a client is 51 years. Yeah, 51 years. Many people, I always send out an initial questionnaire, and that's one of my first questions: how long were you married? And 40 years isn't uncommon. It's a bit of a relief when they say 10 or 12 years, really, because those are the shorter marriages. They don't tend to be much shorter than that, and certainly in the clients that I see, and usually we're talking upwards of 25 years in the clients that I see. It's the norm for the clients that I see to be upwards of 25 years, I would say. Wow.
And we're seeing a huge amount of support. Our listeners are supporting each other within the chat function at the moment. There's lots of shout outs for some awfully large numbers, actually, for length of marriage there. Can you tell me a bit about how you help your clients? Perhaps I'm interested in the length of time that they may spend with you.
Yeah. That's very variable, because I'm not a therapist, so I don't go, you have to see me every week for a therapeutic hour, which is 50 minutes, and then I'm going to go goodbye at the 50th minute, and that, I don't do that. So what I do is it's driven by that person, it's driven by the client. So I can see people on an ad hoc basis, or I can see, or a one-off basis, or regularly. It's completely driven by them, because they haven't been in control for a really, really long time. And so it's kind of handing the power back, you know, in this one tiny area of their lives. They get to choose, they get to say, you know, oh, well, maybe I'll come back to you in a few months' time. And you know, people come back, they might have months between seeing me. They might come for specific things. I'm in court in 3 weeks' time. I need some support, you know. Or they might sort of, as I say, have a regular amount of time with me. It's totally dependent on them. I really want it to be driven by them, because I do want them to hold the power in this one area at least, you know, because it's the beginning of taking back the power.
Absolutely. And it's a huge step. It really is. I'm feeling a huge amount for a lot of people out there at the moment who are listening to our session tonight. Now, can we just go back to some terminology? Really, now a narcissist is not the same as a psychopath or a sociopath. Could you?
This is so difficult. This is the hardest question because no, it's not. No, not technically. You get all sorts of different answers on this. And I'm probably going to confuse everybody here by giving all the different or some of the different answers that you'll get on this. But actually, a sociopath or a psychopath, in terms of medical diagnosis, and the actual terminology is antisocial personality disorder, ASPD. That has its own category in the diagnostic manual, statistical and manual, the book that's used to make the diagnosis, the DSM-5. So, you know, it's ASPD. Psychopaths and sociopaths aren't actually separate entities. It was kind of more of an old-fashioned term. And more of a criminological term as well. So not a mental health term, but a criminological term. Now, some people will say, oh, well, a psychopath is actually just a very extreme narcissist. Some people will say, well, a narcissist needs narcissistic supply. That's what it's all about. They've got low self-esteem. That's why they behave in these ways. A psychopath will behave in very similar ways, but they don't need narcissistic supply because they haven't got low self-esteem. They just behave in the way that they do because they can, you know, because they're cruel and, you know, they're, that's because they can. They get something out of it, but it's not narcissistic supply. It doesn't shield them from anything. So that's what some people will say, whereas other people will say the opposite to that. So it's really hard to know what the difference is, but I sort of wonder whether it matters really. To have a diagnosis of psychopathy, or antisocial personality disorder more correctly, you have to have had a criminal record. So you've had to have shown evidence of a conduct disorder before the age of 15, and then evidence of criminality. So that's another thing. You might not have that with a narcissist, even though the rules and laws don't apply, but it's muddy waters. Glib superficial charm is one of the characteristics, the diagnostic criteria for psychopathy. Well, find me a grandiose narcissist who hasn't got glib superficial charm. Do you see what I mean? It's really mixed bag. So people tend to kind of put them together, and I can see why, if you're going to say, well, a psychopath is just a very extreme narcissist, but it's a really tough question to answer. And then lots of people say, well, he's a psychopathic narcissist, or he's a narcissistic psychopath. And, you know, it's just, it doesn't matter, because actually, when you're dealing with divorce and separation, the tactics are the same pretty much, essentially.
Absolutely. The labels won't help you in a court situation.
No, well, they certainly won't help you in a court situation, no. Unless you get an official diagnosis as ordered by a judge, directed by a judge.
And just to kind of go back to this principle, how to proceed in the best cost effective and way that suits you. One of the questions we've got, just to recap on this area, is should you try to set boundaries or just capitulate in order to get out?
No, because capitulating will mean that they'll change the goalposts. So boundaries are really important. Yeah, you're going to have to set boundaries.
Absolutely. How do you stay sane? How do you advise your clients to stay sane?
Well, one of the massive things, and there's lots and lots of different ways, but one of the things that I think is really useful, and you mentioned it when you were introducing me, was meditation and mindfulness. It's an enormously beneficial tool for people, and the people who do it versus the people who don't are in a totally different place. And it actually works, it's not just some kind of hippie sitting on a cloud, saying type of thing. It genuinely, functional MRI scans show that after 8 weeks of good meditation, so you've been taught to meditate in a certain way, there's actually changes in the brain structure. So there's an increased amount of the density of the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex is actually increased. So it's an enormously beneficial way of helping you to cope, because it lowers your threshold. Narcissistic abuse, and people will really get this, people who are listening to this, if they're in the midst of this, the narcissist tips them into fight, flight, or freeze. It tips them into that, into stimulating that part of the brain that makes them want to run away or freeze or fight or fawn and give in to the narcissist. There's an actual reaction going on there. And meditation and mindfulness can actually reduce their reactivity to those triggers, which is, of course, enormously beneficial. So that's one of the things that I recommend. I mean, really understanding what's going on as well, and awareness. That's the first step, really. A real deep understanding of narcissism is really important, so that you kind of, you can manage it then. If it's not personal, I mean, it could be anybody, literally. It's not actually about you. So that helps a great deal as well. It could be anybody else going through it, because this is not personal. It's just a quest for narcissistic supply. So just understanding that and knowing how to respond to it really helps people. But then there's all sorts of things. I mean, you've got to get the right amount of sleep, and there's so many things. And how do you deal with the panic, in the moment? How do you stimulate your parasympathetic system? And there are lots of hacks for that. Our book has a whole chapter on specifically that. The Divorcing a Narcissist book, because it's just so important, because people wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like they've got a double-decker bus parked on their chest in blind panic, and they need to be able to deal with it. The fear of the future. There's just so much to consider. So yes, please, have a look in the book if you can, or obviously listen to our podcast as well, because there's lots of useful tips on there as well.
Lovely. Kate's just put the link actually to the website with the books in the chat function as well. I think possibly we're over time now, but thank you very much for staying with us, folks. Supriya, could you give us your top tips for people who know that inevitably they're going to need some help in terms of legal advice? Top tips really for finding that legal advice. I'd like your view. Obviously, I'm biased. I've been doing this a long time. I have my own little way of telling people what they should look for. But what do you think people should look for most in their lawyer?
Definitely someone who, when you sit down with your lawyer, say, before we start, what do you understand by the term narcissistic personality disorder? And if they go, oh, I deal with a lot of high conflict people, or, oh, I don't like labels, or yes, I'm sure he or she is very difficult, or, if they fob you off, and they don't answer the question with, oh, well, narcissistic personality disorder is a condition of low empathy. They don't tell you those things. I'm afraid they don't know how to deal with narcissism. As you need someone who really understands it, not someone who has a sort of half-baked, vague idea. They need to really understand it. Otherwise, they will become a weapon of abuse, and they will run up your legal costs inadvertently by being basically incompetent, I'm afraid. And they won't mean to be. They can be very nice, and they can want to do the best that they can for you. They will want to do the best, because family lawyers are generally empathic people, but it's not enough to have empathy and to care. You want someone effective. So you really do want someone who can answer that question with a proper answer. I'm afraid, secondly, meeting with lots of lawyers, is really important, and actually asking them that question. And, people who've been in these types of relationships, it doesn't come naturally to them to sit down and go, what do you understand by the term narcissistic personality disorder? And very often the lawyer might be thinking, oh, they're the narcissist because they're asking me this question. So, you've got to be slightly sort of, aware of that as well. But you've got to sort of stand up for yourself. You've really got to stand up for yourself. If your lawyer doesn't understand it, and you get an inkling, you've instructed them and you get an inkling, you start to realize they don't understand it, I'm afraid you are going to have to sack them. And people who have been in narcissistic relationships, oh, but they're really nice and I want to give them the chance to prove themselves, and this case will help them to learn so they can help other people. You know, they will literally do that. They will put themselves last because they always put their needs last, because that's what narcissists go for. So they'll think, oh, they'll put the needs of their own lawyer first. It will help them to help other people if they do this case with me and learn from it. You know, you've really got to put yourself first. I'm afraid you're going to have to find a lawyer that really does. So I've already, you know, understand it. I've already mentioned having that higher level of training. So maybe someone who's an arbitrator as well, maybe someone who does hybrid mediation or does collaborative practice, or any of the other sort of things that have shown that they've done a lot more. You know, don't go with the junior solicitor, because it's going to be really difficult for them, and they'll be lying awake at night, not knowing what to do, and letting you down and feeling very badly about it and not being effective. So it might cost you less to go with the junior solicitor, but you know, not really worth it in this case, unfortunately. So you just need, and also, you know, I heard of a case where one of my clients actually asked the question, sat down, what do you understand by narcissistic personality disorder? And the lawyer said to him, oh, I know lots about it. In fact, I'm writing a blog post on it. £85,000 later, before they'd even got to either of the child arrangements court hearing, not even the first one, the court hearing, or the FDA, the financial hearing, it became patently obvious that, in fact, even though he'd written a blog post on it, he knew nothing about narcissistic personality disorder. So you need to get into the specifics, I'm afraid. So that sounds quite harsh, doesn't it? You know, but these people have got to know that they've got to look out for themselves. They really do. And they've got to get the right lawyer. It's absolutely crucial.
Yes, and it's a pivotal time in that person's life as well, because they're learning so much about themselves, because they could have been in a marriage that's 35 years in length and then wake up and find out that they've been with a narcissist. So it's not just getting the head around NPD themselves, but it's getting around the fact that they were in that situation, but how do they then put themselves forward? It's absolutely fascinating. It really is fascinating. It's sad that we're talking about this, but it is, we have to have the conversation. We have to shout it from the rooftops, don't we? There's a lot of sad things being mentioned in the chat function in tonight's webinar. There's a lot of support for each other, which I'm really loving. Please, I hope if anyone came on the session at the beginning and was feeling lonely, I'm hoping you're not feeling lonely now, and I'm hoping that we've managed to give you some top tips. We could do this, well, we will do this again, there is no doubt about it, because Supriya is a massive wealth of information. Let me just have a look where we are doing our next when we have more of you. The podcast is launching mid-May. I can see that in the videos at the end of May. So it's literally a matter of weeks for you guys to see Supriya, obviously on a Stowe method of communication. But please, I do urge you, go and have a look at the website, have a look at the books, read them. Let us know what you think about tonight's session. It's impossible to cover everything. Is there anything you want to, like a final, I was going to say Jerry Springer thought for the day, Supriya. I'm not sure if you remember Jerry Springer.
I do remember Jerry Springer.
But it seems impossible to summarise tonight's subject, really. But is there anything that you think we've missed, or you want to just round off, or just a message to people who are listening tonight?
Well, I mean, so just briefly, I would say, you know, if you cannot find a lawyer who understands narcissism, and again, this sounds like, oh, I'm trying to sell books. It isn't that. We wrote these books because there was a desperate need for them. So we do have a book for the lawyer, Narcissism and Family Law, a Practitioner's Guide. It does tell them every single thing they need to know. We even have sort of bits where, you know, the response to the other side's letters is sort of, you know, actually written out. We've got a few sample responses. I mean, we go into an enormous amount of depth. So if you can convince your lawyer, I mean, hopefully you won't need to convince them too hard, but to read that book, they will actually then be armed with all the information that they need. So I think that's an important point to make. And as I say, this absolutely is not about book sales. I just couldn't sort of stand by and watch this carry on, really. So that's what this is about. So, you know, so I would say that. And also just to say, you're going to get through this. You're going to get through this. And remember that point about narcissistic supply. The most important thing, do not give them narcissistic supply. That's what they need from you. And if you don't give it to them, they will go away and find it from someone else and leave you alone. That's your power right there.
Okay. My responsibility here as a relatively senior lawyer is to make sure that my junior lawyers are not in that situation. They're going to be reading your book, and well, the ones that haven't done already, and to make sure that the next generation, those lawyers coming up through the ranks, they know about this from the beginning, right from the beginning of their training and the training contracts, etc. They don't need to wait until they've been practicing for a few years. This is a conversation that we all need to be having now. Whether it ever makes it onto the family law syllabus at uni, I don't know, probably not. But let's increase awareness. Let's keep this conversation going. Supriya, thank you. I've really enjoyed tonight. There's a huge amount of love on the chat. Oh, crikey, we haven't even talked about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, have we? Crikey, maybe we should do that in due course when the hearing finishes, when the court case finishes. Maybe that's a good topic to do in the future. But thank you very much, as always, for your time and your wisdom and the lovely way that you share everything with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. See you soon, guys. Have a lovely evening. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. Take care. Good night, everyone.